This is MURAL Backstage Pass. My name is Mark Tippin. I'm the head of services for MURAL. My co-host today is Haley Temple, is services lead at MURAL. And for the next 60 minutes, we're going to take you behind the scenes of a teamwork session. Our goal is to help you gain confidence in using MURAL in a bunch of different ways. With MURAL Backstage Pass, we broadcast the work as it happens, and we hope this inspires you to use your facilitation superpowers in new ways with your team. To help you get the most from today's session, Haley and I are going to call attention to methods, mural features, and best remote collaboration practices. Today we have Stefan Vering from our Enterprise Transformation Management team, and he works and concentrates his efforts with our Mural Consultant Network, which is very relevant for today's topic. So welcome, Stefan. Thanks for joining. Behind the scenes, we have Erica and Gino from our Mural support team who's going to be pointing out mural features and sharing links in the chat as we go. So lots of valuable information is going to be going on in the chat window. Also, feel free to talk amongst yourselves as we go, create community. All right, let's get started. Haley, can you kick us off?
Absolutely. So today we want to talk a little bit more about workshop amnesia or even conference amnesia. It's so easy to do because you get people in a room, whether that's in person or virtually, and there's lots of energy, there's lots of desire to drive forward the actions and connect with people before and during and after the session. But then we get caught up in emails that we have to catch up on after the workshop, and other responsibilities that come back in, and it's so easy to filter and quickly lose sight of what the agreed upon actions were and next steps that need to happen. So today we wanted to talk about how to create these digital leave behinds for your workshops, even if you're doing an in-person workshop and capturing that documentation and putting it into Mural, or if you're doing an online workshop, doing everything in a Canvas and then sharing it with people. So ultimately, we want to share some of the work that we do and that we're going to do. And then invite you also to add some questions and some comments about things that will be helpful for you to create a digital leave behind. As a team, we're going to focus on a couple of different events we have coming up, a couple conferences, some workshops and meetups and things like that. There's so much great activity going on, but we also want to make sure that we're helping people remember what's important from those sessions. So today we're going to talk about that, and hopefully at the end of this, you have a sense of designing your own digital leave behind, and we'll even afterwards share a template of what we created so that you can make your own. Sound good? Anything else to add in there?
Stefan, maybe you want to share a little bit of the context of MCN and why this session might be of particular interest to those folks.
Sure, I'd be happy to. In terms of what the MCN is, it's the Mural Consultant Network. We provide consultants who apply to join our network. Once you are accepted, we will give you a free workspace of 10 members and 25 guests, so that Mural can now be a free tool that creates value in your toolkit that you're presenting to your clients or that you're using with your clients. And speaking of your clients, as you engage with them, whether it be a one-day workshop to an entire kind of project that spans across multiple months, from something short to something super long and everywhere in between, there are probably often times, or I know there are times that are often where you as a consultant are looking to recap and send a summary of what you just did with your clients to your clients so that they have a valuable takeaway that they can revisit, and in terms of the actual session that you just ran, so that what you just taught them they can then apply in further in future projects, I should say. So I know how valuable this is as a consultant, especially if you're new to Mural, and finding best ways to recap what you've just done and summarize that and easily share that back to your client. So hopefully today that you can feel inspired over the next 50 some minutes to be able to now feel confident to summarize your workshop in Mural and send it off to your clients very easily.
Right. So how many people do we have with us today?
We have, I think I saw
About 11.
11, yep.
Okay, cool. All right. So I was going to ask a question. Maybe they could pop an answer into the chat. I would say, when you maybe you're just running a meeting, half hour, an hour meeting. Maybe you're a facilitator and you're actually responsible for larger engagements. I'd be curious to say, like, how do you go about summarizing that information and sharing it back into the attendees, or do you? I'd love to know what are some of the ways that you're currently doing that right now.
And yeah, some examples, I was telling you guys this yesterday, of before I had Mural, it was my job to take pictures of everything in the workshops room and then bring all those pictures back, upload them, and then go into PowerPoint and make little boxes and type into every box what was on a sticky note. So you can imagine if there's a 3-day workshop or something, and there's a bunch of different activities in different groups, just how long it takes to do something like that. And then you don't even know who saw it, right? Like I would share it out, and then a lot of times it wasn't revisited, unfortunately. So the amnesia struggle is real.
Yeah, I'd also be curious. I see in the chat we have some people that are some that are doing it, some that have good intentions but don't get around to it, because it is a lot of additional effort. And some people that are like, wow, this would be so helpful to have someone actually do this in a meeting. And that's funny because we find ourselves doing that quite a bit. In terms of, we talk about facilitators and in terms of people that are leading the session, but a lot of times you can help facilitate a broader discussion, not just what happens in the room, but helping keep that energy alive by just making yourself available to another team and taking notes in real time. We do that all the time. That's why we are so fortunate to have folks like Gino and Erica that come in and help, because there's being on stage or helping keep the activity moving, but there's so much that happens behind the stage to make sure when you're done, it doesn't fall to one person to try and capture, a 2-day conference. That's just too much of a burden. And sometimes the effort you'd put into that, it may not equate to the value you need to get out of it. So being able to really have the things captured all along and then do an editing process at the end, I think is really sets you up for success. So I think what we were going to do today is actually kind of unpack what would it be like. Our goal here is actually to solicit from the audience and from those of us that have been, we've been through a couple conferences recently. We were just at the Google Design Sprint Conference, and we've seen how valuable these kind of assets can be. And we're going to kind of unpack what should be in there. And though we won't complete the entire task during our hour together, we wanted to start setting up the requirements, if you will, do some brainstorming requirements around what a template might be like that we could then share back to the community, share with our MCN members, and also use ourselves, make sure that we're being mindful, following a process, kind of thinking in terms like we do around workshops. What can we do before, during, and after to be thoughtful about this asset and not make it just an afterthought. So for those of you online, if you have any suggestions as we go, feel free to drop them into chat. And why don't I just open the question up to our panelists ourselves. What are some of the things that why might we want this asset? Let's get really clear on what the goal would be of having this asset.
So to me, it's a lot of time. I guess it depends if it's a workshop or a conference. So I'm thinking about if it's a workshop, I want to be able to follow up and kind of keep the momentum going after a session happens. And at the end of a session, we're ultimately saying, okay, well, what are the action items? Who's going to execute on this next? And I want to make sure that we're holding people accountable for that. And then in the weeks and months after that session, we're checking in on what's happened when, and like if there are blockers, how do we remove those blockers and things like that. So it's keeping accountability and momentum.
Got it. And that was, and just so I captured it correctly, that was kind of in terms of the workshop.
Yeah, I guess because
Yeah.
the way I see it is like a big, like the one we did for the Google Design Sprint Conference, and we can drop the link to that one for the community in there too. But that we weren't necessarily saying to people, yeah, you have to do this after this session. It was more, we're giving you a taste and exposing you to some of the thoughts around remote workshops. Now here's some further reading and some tools at your disposal to go that. But it was much more of a soft ask, I would say.
Yeah, and that's probably, Stefan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for consultants, you know, you've got some type of financial exchange going on. There's some value. There's there's the event that you've had, the workshop that you've orchestrated and you've done. But part of your overall success with that client is being able to keep the flow going, right? And showing that value.
Exactly. And to add to Haley's point, I would say that as from the consultant perspective or just the facilitator's perspective, you as a facilitator are able to set the expectations and set your intentions. Some of the things that we know that we learned last week at the Design Sprint Conference from Google was how to set some intentions so that you have a focus for your workshop or for your sprint, whatever it may be. And this particular artifact, I believe, extends that intention and sets the expectation for you as a facilitator to continue that momentum. So that's how I would kind of add to the context of momentum in that way.
Something else, sorry to interrupt, but I want to kind of be a voice for our chat.
Please
here.
do.
Yeah.
Louisa in chat, Louisa Silva mentioned, I love how the team can pick up where they left off. Action items collection is difficult to capture. If only one person facilitating, would be great to get tips on how to get around to it. So just wanted to throw that in as well.
Ooh, I like that, like tips on keeping yourself accountable to it in a way. To stick to the plan. And then Val, I don't know too, I guess we said conferences, workshops, and then meetups. Or I don't know if they're like a different animal compared to conferences. So what do you think about that? And for background, Val is our meetups guru basically, and has been coordinating these great interactive like mini conferences in a way for Mural users.
Yeah, I would say indeed they are maybe mini conferences. They are similar in a way. Maybe so. I think to your point, we could copy many of the things like inspiration, further exploration. Basically, having a how do you say it, like a framework to move back to. Like, hey, what was this meetup about again? Like you might have forgotten already a couple of days later. At least I often have. Having this reference would be amazing for me to see like the content again. Maybe another one is to go back to like, hey, who were attending this meetup with me, or who were attending this conference with me? So actually having links back to other participants.
Because we get a lot of those asks, right? To connect or create a community of people and remember who was there, but we definitely want people to opt into that versus us broadcasting that in a way. So it's a little more subtle.
Totally, yeah. Definitely.
About, I know personally as like putting myself in the shoes of a workshop goer, is a digital leave behind would really help with remembering the little things. Because I know when you go to a conference or when you go to a workshop or a meetup, you remember what the whole thing was about and you're like super jazzed about a sprint or whatever it was, and you remember one or two things. But I know that in a workshop, somebody might say one thing and I go, oh, that's great. But then it gets overshadowed by the grand idea. And so having a leave behind that has more of the specific information that you might have forgotten would be really helpful.
Yeah, I don't, that's a great point. And you've reminded me, a lot of times, especially if you're at a conference and there are multiple topics, each person has got a slide deck, maybe some PowerPoints or a PDF. And, I think when we were talking about this before the call, there's this one source of truth. That for me has been really valuable, using Mural as a way to create a digital leave behind that includes all of the links to all of that stuff. So if I can find that one mural, then I can go start my own exploration around all those different topics. And I think we'll show the Google document that was built, and how that used, the Google Design Sprint talks about a sprint process in 5 days, and we just borrowed that format of the 5 days to actually stack resources and ideas related to each one of those days and give it context. And so being able to provide that one source to access and unlock all of the other content, I think is another huge value add. I also want to just back up for a second while we're catching up on the note taking here. The method here that we're using is something we often fall into in Mural as we work, and it's a mind mapping technique, and it can be a little messy. But the thing that's incredibly valuable about this is the collective knowledge building that we end up doing in real time, and inspirations, you can see ideas just kind of knock off each other and we build out this one part of it, and then momentum falls a little bit. Well, if all of that was just words we said in the air, we'd have to go back and replay a video, kind of refresh our memory. But here we've got this thing that grows in real time and allows us, even as Vout did, we ask him about meetups and he goes for inspiration to some of the conversations we've already had, and starts uniting some of the points and some of those together with a new topic in a way where it's very quickly for us to kind of really build this collective meaning. And working visually, which underpins almost all the work we do, and all of these kind of use cases that people might not be used to, any meeting benefits from this type of structure. I think we find it's, we're all context switching. So we're here for this hour, and then we go straight into something else, and we go into another call. Sometimes we've got back-to-back calls. Well, we want to get back to this, right? Our goal all along was build a great template that we can use, that our partners can use, but all of this stuff would just vaporize into the ether. But if we come back together as a group and we've got this visual artifact, we can kind of, rehydrate, reconstitute all of these ideas, and they become fresh again, and we're able to context switch and come back into context. So I just wanted to highlight this is, and there are all sorts of keyboard shortcuts. Right? Control, if you hold the C key down, you can click and drag arrows. If you're typing in a sticky note and you hit the tab key, it'll automatically create a new note of that color. So anyway, just wanted to kind of come up a level and highlight that.
So I think we've fleshed a little bit out about like kind of the purpose behind these 3 different components: the meetups, the workshop, the conference. Maybe we can take a look at some of the different examples that we've done for workshops and for conferences, and then it would be interesting to create almost an ingredient list for each of them. Because I think, especially for the conference, the sprint conference, like our last Backstage Pass session, we built the presentation and the digital gift bag, but I don't know if we necessarily went behind like the purpose of them. So maybe let me start with the gift bag, if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so let me drag this in here, and I'll also share this link in the chat so that those of you who are joining us can also look at this, and now you actually have it, so you can reference it later on. So this is, and that's the beauty of this, right? So just to set some context, Mark and Stefan and our teammate Mary, we all attended the Google Sprint Design Conference, and we did a session on remote design sprinting. So we had 2 hours with about 30 plus people, and we wanted to make sure that we were exposing them to different tips and methods for doing design sprints in a remote setting, but we realized that's just skimming the surface, getting people into that space. And we wanted to give them some way to follow up, to continue learning, and to get us to deepen their knowledge in that space. So what we did was create this gift bag, and we shared the link with them to be able to think about different components and the different elements that they have to consider when they're doing this 5-day sprint in a remote setting. So maybe before I go walk through it, team, I would love you guys to step back, take a look at this, and kind of highlight what are some of the key ingredients in this digital gift bag that are important or that maybe are helpful to somebody leaving a conference. And in the chat too, if you guys, as the audience, if you guys see any and want to highlight those, please put those in the chat.
I love like the beginning part of the gift bag, you called it. I love the name, by the way. Like that you have a little bit of theory, like a little bit of I'd say like a background. Like, hey, what did we talk about again? So here's like, hey, how to assemble team, how to prepare for a remote design sprint. I think that really sets the scene and brings you back into the mood you maybe were in the conference after reading this, and sets you back in that mindset. I think that's super helpful.
Okay, thank you. What else?
I found the timeline that stands out to me the most, looking at what happened on each day and what was the mural that we used on each day and what was that purpose as well. Connecting the dots in a timeline format to me is easy to digest, and that is probably the biggest thing that stands out here.
Mm-hmm. So to call that out too, Stefan, I think that's a great point. Is so this right here, this timeline doesn't just have pictures. These are also templates. So somebody who is getting this gift bag can double click on any of these pictures, and then they'll be linked to the design sprint template right here, so that they can go ahead and create their own template from it and use it. I don't know how obvious that is though, and that's something I'm curious if you guys have any ideas how to make that a little bit more clear. I did like double click the image to open the template, but I don't know how at first glance if that's easy to tell.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think what's vital to these kinds of things are the tools and tips to keep exploring sections. Just because I know, whenever you're dabbling into a new area or something you don't know, it's really easy to follow along when somebody else is facilitating that for you, or basically, you have the answer book. You can easily piece back, oh, that makes sense. But then when you try to transcribe that to your own way, it's like, well, where do I begin? This is a completely new problem. So having tools and tips, and then also, like we were talking about earlier, about just keeping momentum going the whole time, is that keep exploring button is, ooh, I'm interested on this. What else can I learn about this if I want to keep getting deeper and deeper in my understanding? So I think, any sort of digital leave behind can value greatly or benefit greatly from these two sections.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point too. I mean, from the participants' perspective, wanting to help them keep digging in and learning more, and then also from like a pure marketing and promotion perspective, these are links to articles that our partners wrote. So the 3 facilitators up here, Robert, Jay, and Ross, they are our partners. They were part of the MCN. And so we wanted to promote their great work and working with us. So anything here is from them, so people can see what they're doing, reach out to them, and continue that conversation.
Well, yeah, so I captured that also as well. That was a critical element as well, because really for us, for me, the thing that made this session really relevant was not the fact that Mural was there. It was the fact that we had 3 people that have been real pioneers in not only the design sprint movement, but in bridging in-person co-located sprinting into the virtual realm, and they each had a different take on it. So I think it was a huge way for us to kind of shift the spotlight off of Mural and onto the use cases, which I think people in the audience also appreciate, that it's not so much, you know, hey, look at us, look at Mural, look at this tool. It's Mural is wonderful because of what our users do, you know, and what they're, the creative ways that they're um, you know, forming new ideas and new ways of working with people they influence.
All right. Why don't we, anything else on here? I think if we want, we can also shift over to a workshop specific one too.
Yeah, the only other thing I call out is that we used, you know, from a branding perspective, and again, when people, if they have lots of different documents from a conference, we did take some time to borrow the color palette, right? So we created custom colors that kind of resonate, and the visuals, these diamonds and arrows and things, were visual elements that were part of the sprint branding. So right away, if someone comes into this document and they were at the sprint conference, then there's some symmetry. It's not a big deal, but it does help kind of it's a little evocative of the whole environment that they experienced at that conference, and as opposed to just a blank canvas with a bunch of stuff in it, taking a little bit of time to drop some of that, the color, and having it look and feel like part of the conference helps. And I'd imagine that's relevant also, Stefan, for consultants that want to white label this stuff. It's right. It's got to look like me and my brand, my consulting, and it's got to look like, you know, that, you know. And so there's a lot of flexibility inside Mural to have custom color palettes. You know, you can make any color notes you want. You can use shapes and typography, and use color as a strong way to bring your brand in.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to touch on this one before we get out is just how easily digestible it is as well. Is that it's not trying to just put every single thing you said word for word verbatim on to a mural. It's, you know, set the stage, one sentence, and it's organized. So taking the time to see how you want readers to be able to interact with your digital leave behind, rather than just being like, hey, let's give them 100 links, 100 pictures, and then they can figure out what they want from it from there. It's pointing them, like directing them without them even really knowing it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's obvious. It's so obvious I didn't even think of it. But yeah, there's some structure to it. There's a design. There's a way where we were thoughtful about trying to make it so it could be digestible.
It's just camouflaged in there. You don't even think about it.
Yeah, storytelling is always a big piece of creating anything digital or physical, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. So this is just one example. I did add a link to it in this Canvas, and we can also share this Canvas with you guys who joined us afterwards. So yeah, you guys will be able to access that. All right, and then let me open up the next one, Mark, that you shared with me. Which one do we want to open first? I have both of those here.
Oh, let's see. Why don't we go with the remote work roundtable? Yeah, this one.
This one? Cool.
Yeah. So Laurel Farr is an amazing person who's done just tirelessly, endlessly working for to support remote work, and she invited several people to contribute to these kind of online mini conferences, and we really expanded my notion of what remote work is. For example, for me, remote work was being able to go to work in your bunny slippers and your robe. Right? That was my very mature sense of remote work. Is that? So she's worked to bring fiber into remote areas in Utah and other states. So working with the legislation to make sure that people could populate more rural areas. That was one thing. We're like, oh yeah, you could actually be impacting the world at a different level. The other one was working with companies in Ireland to really become more public about the notion of remote work, because small communities in Ireland couldn't get a rugby or a soccer match together, football, and these small towns were really suffering from the young minds going into Dublin and the big cities. So she was working to really have this kind of secretive, you know, yes, we have remote work, but we won't talk about it. to work with some big companies like Shopify and others to be very public. Anyway, really interesting conversations, amazing people, and I felt a little humbled to be part of some of these conversations. So what I did is I took time within Mural to capture in real time who was on the call, what were their talking points, and tried to use this mind mapping method to capture in real time a digital asset, and then also the Q&A as well. Capturing the attendees, right? So that came up on our ingredient list, who was there, who was on the call. And then all the way over to the right, I went back through their webinar software they used and tried to capture all the way, like keep going all the way over to the right. There you go.
Yeah,
So
sorry, I think I'm making you guys nauseous. Moving
Oh, that's okay.
quickly.
That's okay. But there was this huge, vibrant discussion that was going on in the chat. And for me, I thought, wow, it's so important, and to add the ability for people to see who said what, and when they would mention, a company or a link or a resource, that I would just go find that resource and drop it right in here. And I kind of did it and offered it humbly, just to say, thanks for letting me participate. Here's a little gift for including me in the conversation. And it became something that they really valued as a community because it captured this talk. So it's not fancy, it's not as well designed, but it was done in real time. Right? Within 15 minutes of the end of the call, I was able just to share a link back to everyone that was on the invitation list. So the other one, if you want to show that, that one is a little bit more grandiose. This is when you're running a 3-day workshop. This is actually a Luma workshop that we run frequently with a very large corporate international consulting agency. And so what this is all of the artifacts from an in-person workshop captured and sorted and done in kind of like a board game style where you can follow all of the activities. Because in a lot of these workshops, as a design thinking workshop, this is a perfect case for that workshop Amnesia. You have someone facilitating 3 days of these amazing artifact building, and you're in the middle of it, but the next week you can't remember 10% of what method did we do, what came before, what did we do, how did that one lead to the next one. So these are not trivial to produce, but they are incredibly valuable, not only for me as a learning tool as a facilitator, because the workshop has evolved over the time, so I can kind of go back and look and say, for myself, I could do a rose thorn bud on top of this and say, this part we could improve a little bit, and this part really worked well. But it's a huge gift back to people that were willing to commit 3 days to go through workshop with you, and I shared this as a view-only link with that cohort, and I still get people 2 years later that reach out on LinkedIn and say, thanks so much for doing this. It took a while before I could start applying this stuff into projects, but I was able to go back into this asset and suddenly remember all of the details about how to actually facilitate these things. And the photos of what the room looked like, a lot of times give permission for it being messy. A lot of times people have this sense that everything's got to be perfectly crafted, but a lot of these innovation conversations are messy and unstructured. So anyway, so there's another example. Little more work, but I still go back to it and refer to it. Every time I have to teach one of these, I can just use this to refresh my memory and go, what's the pacing? How does it?
Yeah, I love this picture of the group too. Just like who was there, who was in what breakouts and stuff like that. You just have all of that recorded. Super cool. I guess, Mark, I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
What was your process? I mean, okay, what did you guys do before you had Mural to capture all of this stuff, or did you at all? And then, like, what was your process to capture all of this information?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So before Mural, it was a zip file with a ton of photos that no one ever looked at, and maybe an email or a Word doc that tried to, or just sharing, using the agenda you use to plan, which is a Word doc with the timestamps and the sequence, and that's all you had available to kind of share back. The process for doing this, I use an iPad Pro and Cam Scanner, which recently there was a scare because it's developed in China, and apparently one version of it was riddled with malware. Fortunately, I had a version that was really old and out of date, so I didn't suffer from it. But apparently that's all corrected now. But the thing there's Adobe Scan, there's some other tools out there. The thing I love about Cam Scanner is two things. One, it'll do the keystone correction, so you can stand back and take a picture from the side at a wall artifact, and it will straighten it out, flatten it out, and it does this pass where it'll do a high contrast, and so the background, the white areas become pure white. So if you do print these things out, you're not burning a bunch of ink because it's a photo that has some light gray in the background. But it also allows me to tag them and sort them and all that stuff, and I can bulk import them into Mural. So the tedious part is just being on top of capturing the artifacts, but it goes pretty fast. With that app as well, you can take a ton of photos and then it'll process them in the background so you can capture in real time. But then once they're in there, I'm sizing and panning and then using text and arrows. I use Snagit all the time too. If you zoom into the upper left-hand corner of the mural, you'll see I actually just did screen captures right out of the PowerPoint deck we used to lead the class. Those kind of teal screens. So I start by giving the context of the decks and the agenda for each day, and then that connects to what they saw in the classroom. But then in these workshops, you're very frequently just leaving the PowerPoint behind and you're actually building these artifacts. So so it anchors them with like, oh yeah, what it looked like, but then takes them into all the art. And yeah.
That's so cool. I didn't know about Cam Scanner. That's a good tip. And then you introduced me to Snagit, which now I use all the time.
I can't live without it.
So we'll add that as another little tip in there. That's so fun. It's just like a little journey that you're taking them on and helping them remember everything.
Like I said, it's not trivial to build, but and I don't do it for every class. It's because it does take a couple hours to really be thoughtful about. Because every time you run one of these, it's a little different. The highlights, the things that you spend time on, the insights, that several people have mentioned, those little things that happen, they're a little unique each time. And so, so to really be thoughtful with it takes some.
And anything group, like team group, I don't know. Anything else from your perspective or you've seen or done in your own workshops like this that would help convey this story? For example, I always assign somebody to take pictures, so as a facilitator, I don't need to worry about it. And then it also reduces the risk of if somebody's just coming in saying, oh, I'm going to be a fly on the wall and watch. I'm like, no, you're taking pictures and you're sending them to me and you're documenting everything. You're welcome.
No, I think that's, that's extremely, you can't run these workshops without at least two facilitators, facilitator and a co-facilitator. And so part of that dance is clearly dividing the agenda up, and so when you're on and when you're supportive. And when you're supportive, it's not go down the hall and get a cup of coffee. It's you're being mindful of what's the next activity, what do people need in the room, and capturing. Because in some of these things, the moment that's important is like the concept poster before there's feedback, so you can actually read all the detail, and then capturing the concept poster after all of the rose thorn buds have been tacked on it, so you can see the feedback. But if you only capture one state or the other, then you can't actually see the poster if you don't have a copy of the poster. So it does take someone who is familiar with the flow and has some sense of what's going to happen, which I think is with any good photographer. Really excellent professional photographers are, they know when to kind of rummage around and be low key, and then when they'll stand there for 5 minutes and they know that the moment is coming and they need to capture it, and then they're back to, just knowing those moments in the agenda is important to build something like this.
So let me I want to make sure I go back and look at some of the ingredient lists that we've been building. So yeah, capturing attendees, who was there, the chat and discussion. It's a quick gift back, yeah. And I also like gosh, like you did a really good job saying, like, okay, well, here's day 1 and day 2, and then this is how it, day 1, and this is how it feeds into day 2. So you connect the dots and the activities really well. The little journey.
Just another tip for if you're facilitating a multi-session workshop is you'll get a lot of people that in the moment will say, oh yeah, I understand this and I know how to apply it to my work and everything. But then you ask them the following week and they go, sure. So I always push for a summary where they actually repeat, they voice back to you. Ask them, okay, so where did we start? Oh, we did a warm-up. Why did we do warm-up? Well, because we were sleepy. Great. Why else? Oh, we got to know each other, right? So you have them kind of regurgitate all that they went through, and collectively, they will be able to rebuild an incredibly detailed artifact on their own. So that's another way where you can have them actually build the artifact that they then own and take forward. And the other advantage from that is many times you're running a session where you've got members of lots of different teams. It's not just one team. Everyone that works together, you've got people who were sent as liaisons to kind of learn this and take it back to the team. And so having them, spending a little bit of time, having them rebuild the share out agenda collectively is a really powerful way for them to be able to speak with intention and authority about all of the highlights in the thing, because they had to participate in building it as well.
So this looks like a pretty good ingredient list. And team, if there's anything we need to add back in, please do. And Stefan, thanks for organizing that. So we have about 15 minutes, and I want to reserve some time at the end just for questions or anything like that. But with this, do you feel like we have enough to make a little workshop template and maybe like a mock-up of one?
Let's see. Yeah, probably. I'm wondering. This is that thing where you want to be thoughtful, but in these sessions, I got to be mindful of the fact that there are people watching that might not want to sit and watch us be silent for 5 minutes as we kind of contemplate things.
Well, I think it's always good to, I know, right? Because it's like, it's unscripted. I'm like, yeah, this is real unscripted. I mean, I think if we as a group say, let's like put our mind on speakerphone, all talk through it out loud as we're building, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so even, all right, yeah, so even from some of the basics, there's, how big is it? Like, what is the intended output, right? I know in many cases, the artifact itself or the mural itself is exported as a PDF, and people will go to large format printers or FedEx Kinkos or something and actually print it out, a large, A4 sized plot. So, on one hand, you could say it doesn't really matter the shape. It could be any shape we want. In a digital realm, if it really is meant to be accessed and parsed, then I think most of the time you can assume like a 4:3 or a 16:9 classic aspect ratios of the artifact. So when you zoom out, it's filling up the screen, right? When Mural unlocked the ability to make long, tall, thin murals, I got really enamored with it, but I realized there's some usability issues. When it's really long and thin, it's like you're constantly having to zoom way in to read something and then zoom out. And but if you figure out something like a scrolling web page, kind of the Pinterest format, then that's that's interesting, where the shape of it can actually lend itself to kind of a vertical discovery scroll, which is kind of cool.
Mhm.
I don't know. What are other people's thoughts? What are you? Anyone from online too? If you're giving this to a client, what do you assume? That they're looking at it on their laptop screen? That they're going to print it?
I can share my 2 cents.
Yeah, please.
I really loved your like 3-day workshop capture, but it was also very intense versus the one that was like a quick give back. So I think maybe you play to the customer a little bit, you know, is it something where you think they'll be able to kind of make their way through that and consume it all versus kind of a quick summary? So maybe a little bit of case by case, but in general, I almost lean towards the more simple version for majority.
Yeah, it should be, like I said, it should be easy to parse. That artifact, that intent, it is intense actually when you dig in there. You can zoom way in and zoom out. But it makes sense to the people that were in the room. But as far as them, it's like they've had this religious experience, and that mural isn't going to help their case for looking like a nut fanatic when they're like, no, we did this, we did this. It looks chaotic, and it kind of, for them, it can revitalize that enthusiasm. But as far as bringing other people that weren't part of the firewalking experience, and they can make it just seem more crazy. That's a good point.
So with that, and I know we don't necessarily have a specific example of a workshop that we could use, or I don't know, we haven't all been in a shared workshop experience recently, but if we're to think about the bare minimum essentials that need to go on a workshop takeaway, maybe if I give us some time to even, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to ask you guys, look, so I'm gonna ask you to follow, I'm gonna summon you real quick. I'm going to give us some time to do like a little brainstorm about the content that should be on this takeaway. And then when we can kind of come back and share out. So if we're thinking about, to your point, Erica, like we did a 1-day workshop, we did these activities, and now we're going to give this back to the customer or whoever was in the room to say, like, this is what happened. We need to take these action items forward, and I want to share it with you. I want you guys to brainstorm and capture here in this content piece, what are the minimum elements that need to go into that? Some of these, considering some of these key ingredients. So, oh, thanks for capturing that, Mark. So
Sure,
1-day
yeah.
workshop, to leave behind, and we want to make sure the goal is to make sure that people follow up on action items and have the resources they need to continue forward. So I'm gonna put 3 minutes on the clock. Furiously adding sticky notes. I love it. And yeah, what our team does so well too is a good way to facilitate it, which I didn't do very well, is to color code things. So you see the team changing colors so that you can see like who's doing what. And then also another thing that our team is very mindful of is like making sure you have your space to collaborate, because if you don't, then you start like bumping into the person next to you. So a lot of times what I'll do in a structured session is give people little workspace areas, and that way they have their own committed area to work. But thankfully the team is very forgiving and figured it out.
I think sometimes it's also interesting to let people just go kind of wild and collaborate, and maybe they put a sticky note on top of somebody else's, and they have to move it and kind of like figure it out in the moment, because it brings in like a little bit of that human aspect to.
Mm-hmm. And Alicia, yeah, and Alicia, I see Alicia, our teammate on here. I'm just adding. She added an idea as well.
Thanks,
For kind of content and guidance.
I saw it in the chat, Alicia. I was going to mention it, and then I got into brainstorming. Forgot.
Yeah.
Oh, don't you worry. Don't you worry. There's so many good ideas.
You know, having just celebrated a birthday too, I feel like, oh, I should have been on top of her suggestion.
Wait, when was yours?
No. I was talking about yours. Yeah, mine's
Oh.
Mine's July 14.
Oh, so you're saying that for my birthday next time you're gonna listen to my idea first?
That's right. Yes.
Well, all right. I'll make sure it's a really good one.
They always are.
All right, about another 45 seconds. Do we need more time before I go? Maybe I'll let it run out and we'll gauge where we are from there.
It's so great also to have that the assumptions and the example there, because it's like you run out of steam and you go back and go like, well, did I say anything about, oh, the goal, or did I say anything about the format or the length of it or the oh yeah.
All right, time is up. So quick little thing, as a facilitator, I have facilitator superpowers. So I can do a timer, I can also do dot voting, and then you guys saw me doing this awesome follow or summon feature as well, so I can make sure people are seeing what I'm seeing and looking at the same thing. So let's walk through, I'll ask you guys to follow me, but I think you guys are on the same spot. So let's walk through a little bit of and unpack this a bit. Let me see, who these green sticky notes, who added those? Actually, I can look.
That would be me.
All right, Gino, take us through it.
So with the content, I think that it should be high level enough to go over the main points without being too specific and in your face. You know, if it's so specific with lots of text and things like that, then nobody's really going to want to take the time to go back to it. So if it looks presentable with powerful visuals, and then allow the people to actually explore more on their own, much like the previous Digital Leave Behind with tips and tricks, and keep exploring or whatever that was called. So that way they can get those key points and the information that they need from the Leave Behind, but then if they're interested in, they can keep going themselves. So it allows yourself to have a little bit more space rather than saying, we got to get every single thing we said onto this Digital Leave Behind. And then I think it's also nice to just have, maybe a little bit of self-promotion or whatever you want to call it, but put those pictures and the contact information of the people that we're presenting or facilitating, so that way people know where they can go if they were like, this was fantastic. Did you have some time to talk more about this? Or what are some ideas that you have around XYZ for people to learn more if they don't want to go to an article and they thought that the presentation or the workshop or the meetup was so great that they want to get it straight from that person.
And yeah, thank you guys as Gino showed. Gino, thank you for sharing. And then the team also clustering some of these things as well is great to just have everything in one spot. All right, so who did this kind of darker yellowy orange notes?
That was me. So the ideas that I added in there was really to be clear on the structure, right? Like what are the things discussed, maybe around the schedule or the flow of the session. Added to that extra learning, other links, to maybe like further reading, further watching. And I guess also like a capture of the more important discussions that were maybe not particularly in the schedule, but things that were discussed.
Okay. Great, thank you. And I'm trying to cluster those together. So it's a summary, but also if there were certain key points to pull those out and highlight them too, that they aren't lost in the visuals. Okay, I see also this point about timeline and flow and agenda. So I know Mark, and I think Stefan, you also had that. So tell me, how do you recommend showing that or capturing that?
So it's interesting because I was reminded when we were planning for the Sprint conference, we actually built a visual agenda. I mean, it was rough and we thought, well, we've got this much time, we chunk it out. We know we're going to do some type of warm up. So you actually have an artifact that you can use, and for me, often that's the starting point. I drop that in, and that becomes the reminder of being able to go back to the beginning and say, oh, what did we do? But I think that also people experience these workshops in a linear sense, and so sometimes the going back to that as an anchor is helpful for them to understand. And then an easy way is also just resharing the agenda. So you've got it, and they've got it. If they want to try and do that workshop or repeat it themselves, they've got something that kind of breaks down what that was all about. I don't know what Stefan might have something else around that.
I have our little visual agenda right up here.
Yeah, I just like using our basic shapes and connectors to be able to start with something rough, like you said, Mark, to then evolve it in the same canvas rather than moving it to a different canvas, knowing that you can easily change, swap out a sticky for a shape and make it more aesthetically appealing as it evolves and you have kind of developed the vision of your timeline and agenda.
Nice. I also want to highlight the final thing is like, how do we make it easy for somebody to consume the information? Because we can plan it out and make kind of like a journey like we did for the digital leave behind, but I think a challenge and what I hear from customers is they want to lead somebody through the experience of what happened, but people might get overwhelmed being dropped into a mural canvas for the first time or knowing what to do with this information. So, and for an example, the outline feature is something that I find really helpful if I'm presenting information or sharing back, and then prompting people to guide through that. So, and just to highlight the outline feature. So if I have a piece of content and I want someone to go and look through the journey, it kind of gives you a visual presentation guide in a way. And I don't know if I'm doing a great job explaining this, but
no,
you might be able to do a better job, Mark.
No, I was going to say, I think you were just reminding me there's probably two ways to use the artifact. One is you could export it as a PDF, and like everyone knows what to do with that. Now you have to lay it out a particular way. You have to be mindful of, small type and large type, and that you kind of have to set, a level of detail across the document. But if you're concerned about people getting into Mural or have digital access in general, bandwidth needs, that kind of stuff, then a PDF is an easy way to still lay it out visually and share it. But it is very different from if you have people that are more familiar with the tool using the outline and being able to use that to actually people go step by step and have it kind of move and walk them through the session and have those additional little steps. It's almost like you could be coaching them on a way to go back and meditate on the different points and then drive them into an activity or even another deliverable when they get to the end of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of walking through this outline mode right now, but you can see it takes me visually around the canvas. So I want to make sure I'm conscious of time. We are at the top of the hour, and actually all of us have to jump over to another exciting call. But what I've done is dropped the link to this canvas onto the chat, so you guys can go ahead in there and look at everything discussed today later on, like a digital gift bag. And if you guys have any other questions about the digital gift bags or leave behinds or anything like that, all of us are happy to follow up and continue that discussion. So we really appreciate you coming. Definitely hope to see you next week on this session too, and we can communicate that topic with you. And with that, thank you guys, team, for joining us today. My Mural coworkers here, always awesome to have you. But
thanks, Stefan, too, for the topic. These are really interesting. We've done social contracts, we've done this digital leave behind, and it I think it's great to have those ideas coming from people that I need this. How do we figure this part out? That makes a difference.
Most definitely.
Thank you guys for supporting it.
You bet. That's what we're here for. All right. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks as always, Haley, for driving and making this so fun. It's a highlight of my job.
Yeah, likewise. I was so excited for this session. And I also love about is making making Gino look more epic. All right. Well,
It's a good luck for you. Halloween is coming.
It is.
I gotta get me a hat and some bow and get very super glasses. Shouldn't be too tough.
Awesome.
All right. We'll talk soon, guys.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye. See you next week, everyone.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.